Good morning, everybody. It's Friday. Happy Friday to you. I don't know why in my head at that moment I couldn't tell you what day it was. I should know what day it is. I've got a wedding this weekend. I'm really excited. I leave for Louisville here in a little bit to be there for a special wedding, and I'm excited about that. But anyway, but I guess that also explains why my brain's a little scattered today. But anyway, it's 10 o'clock. It's time for 10 with Tim. And I'm excited to read Deuteronomy chapter 12 with you today. Deuteronomy chapter 12 starts a whole new section in Deuteronomy. It's not obvious, perhaps. And in some ways, the organization of the next few chapters it just seems a little complicated. But what we start here in chapter 12 is sort of the long section which deals with further instructions. So far, we've still been more or less talking about the 10 commandments, the 10 words, and breaking down how those will function, how that looks, how obedience to those 10 words, what that looks like in the community. But now, starting with chapter 12, we're going to go further out into more guidelines for very specific situations and obligations for the people of God in the worshiping community. So we start here in chapter 12, which I love. The way you know we're starting a new section here is this call to obedience. Chapter 11 ends with that, I'm setting before you blessing and curse. Remember that? And so that sort of signals the end of that section. And then this new call to obedience at the beginning of chapter 12 signals the start of this section. There'll be another call of obedience that kind of closes this section off, I think at the end of chapter 26. But correct me if we're reading along and I find out that I'm wrong, but I think that's the way it is organized. So chapter 12 begins, verses 1 to 7, with this incredible prohibition against any kind of Canaanite worship. Now this is going to be the people that they're driving out. They're driving them out because they're evil, right? And so you don't want to imitate them. You don't want in any way to fall into their pattern of sin, their pattern of worship. And so notice the strong language here for their obligation to eliminate any sign, any leftover, any artifact, any habit. You have to ruthlessly eliminate all signs of pagan worship from the land. Now, if this sounds harsh, it is, because there is just this fierce opposition of sin, and God himself is a God of love, right? But this is why he opposes sin, because sin is anything that contradicts his love. And so that is why you have to ruthlessly eliminate, all opportunities for sin in your life. And this is what's represented here. These idols, this history of idolatry is always going to be a temptation. Get rid of it. Well, doesn't it have some cultural value? Maybe we should put it in a museum. No. I mean, God specifically says, don't even ask, how did they used to do it here? I mean, don't inquire, don't make a documentary just to, keep it for history's sake. I mean, no, get it out. Whatever worth it might have, historically is not going to be worth the spiritual devastation if you fall into this trap. And again, we see this in our own lives. Many of us, we have bad habits. We have sin in our life that we sort of like to get past, but we never get to that point of ruthlessly eliminating this from our lives. I mean, notice the words here in chapter 12. You got to destroy, break, smash, burn, erase, erase their names, he says. Completely erase the names of their gods. Again, the name of the God, if you don't have the name of the God, then you can't call on him, right? And so you erase his name, and that way he's never going to be talked about, never going to be called upon again. I was talking to a dude with a pornography habit, and he tended to fall into a terrible habit of looking at pornography on his phone. And so I said, dude, get rid of your phone. You can't have a phone. Get rid of your phone. He's like, what do you mean? I can't live without a phone. Well, get a dumb phone. Get a dumb phone. A phone that doesn't access the internet, or a phone that you can't possibly, access pornography. Get a dumb phone. And he's looking at me like, you're crazy. I'm not going to give up my phone. And for that reason, probably he's going to persist in his habit, because although he kind of doesn't want to look at pornography, he's not going to eliminate the opportunity, the temptation, And this is what God is saying. You've got to drive them out. You've got to erase the names of their gods. You've got to burn, smash, eradicate, this source of temptation. Verses 8 through 12 pick up with, again, we're talking about worship here. I probably skipped a step here. If Moses is giving, guidelines, instructions for how to live in the land, how to be the community of God, how to dwell in the midst of a holy God, notice how the very first thing he talks about is worship. The very first thing is worship. You have to get the worship right. And so that's why we begin with turning away from the Canaanite practices. And now in verses 8 to 12, even your previous practice, your pattern of worship will change. Today, all you're doing is you please. Oh my goodness, still, the theme here in chapter 12 is you can't just do what you please. It's worship of the one true God. He's going to decide how he is worshiped, where he is worshiped. He will tell you what name to call it. I mean, worship is not just come as you are, do as you please. You were coming into the presence of a holy God, one in whose presence we're not even, qualified or in any way fit to stand. He could and ought to, in many ways, just absolutely annihilate us, but he does not. Because of his grace, because of his mercy, because of the sacrifice of Jesus, we can come into his presence at all. So don't you just come flying in here, and doing whatever you please. I mean, this is the principle here. God himself sets the terms on which he's going to be worshiped. And you're not going to do it as you please. Your pattern of worship will change, verse 8. You've not yet arrived at your place of rest, but in the promised land, you're not going to be wandering anymore. And so God will designate a place of worship. I think it's interesting how in chapter 12, we know the temple's going to be in Jerusalem and all that, but it's never mentioned the actual place. Just God will designate a place. And at that point, that's all they know. But get ready for the change. You're not going to just be able to squat and worship anywhere you want to. God will tell you where to worship him. And that's really begins to be spelled out in verses 8 to 12. Verses 13 to 19 talk about right sacrifice. Again, once more, worship is going to be centralized. You're going to have to come to the place that God designates. You can't just do it, wherever you want to do it. Notice what it says. You may not eat your offerings in your hometown. What's that about? In some ways, again, you can't just do what you want to do. And I don't know if there's much of a connection, but I know right now with the proliferation of online resources for worship, like 10withTim, like the fact that our church streams worship every single Sunday, it's just so much easier to stay home, isn't it? Just stay home and watch church. And I talked to, there are people who haven't come back to church since COVID, and they just tell me, Pastor Tim, I'm watching at home. I'm watching at home. And some of you may be those people. I'm glad you're watching at home. I am. I guess that's better than nothing. But the principle here in Deuteronomy chapter 12 is you don't just get to do it at home. If there is some reason why you can't leave your house, but if you can get to the Mint Gaming Hall to get the best burger in town, but you can't come to church to worship the one true God, then there's probably something profoundly troubled or wrong in your spiritual life. You can't just do it like you please. You can't just eat your offering in your hometown, hometown. It's not just, there is special permission here. Says you can eat meat at home. I'm not saying that you can't slaughter an animal and have Thanksgiving at home, but it can't be your tithe. That's not your worship. You can call that supper, but you can't call it worship. You know, worship of God is going to be conducted on God's own terms, and so you can't do it in your hometown. The hometown there probably prohibits the tribes or prevents the tribes from setting up like local little shrines. You know, we don't want to go all the way to Jerusalem. You know, so let's do a satellite campus. You know, out here closer to where we are. We'll do a satellite campus in Bethlehem, and then we don't have to, go all the way to Jerusalem if we don't feel like it. I mean, no, this is exactly what is being prohibited in chapter 12. You can't just worship where you want. Now, we know that because of Jesus, some of these laws have now been given new fulfillment in Christ, and therefore we have a new freedom in Christ. So that Jesus will tell the woman at the well, God is looking for worshipers in spirit and truth, and it doesn't matter about this mountain or that mountain. But in Deuteronomy chapter 12, it absolutely matters. This is the point for God's ancient people. They have to learn how to worship Him. They have to learn to surrender to Him with whole hearts, and that means that their worship is strictly governed by obedience. So be careful to obey all the commands I give you. You must not add anything to them or subtract anything from them. Ooh, don't we just love to add and subtract to what God has said, but we don't get to do that. We'll pick up right here on Monday morning, Deuteronomy chapter 13, verses 1 to 18 for Monday. Then chapter 14 on Tuesday deals specifically with tithing. I look forward to that. And then we'll just plug right on through this section of Deuteronomy. Listen, have a great weekend. I hope to see you here at worship at Woodburn Baptist Church on Sunday morning, 8, 9:30, 11. If you don't have a church home, gosh, I'd love to be your pastor. I'd love for you to make Woodburn your church home. Maybe I'll see you Sunday. If not, then I will see you, Lord willing, Monday morning, 10 o'clock for 10 with Tim. Deuteronomy chapter 13.